Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics Podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the rapier to mine may gouch, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
Today we are talking about goblins, orcs, giants, and drow.
Cool. So we've done this same sort of format way back in the day, real early into our podcast. We took sort of the main set of fantasy people and remixed those species. And we're just going to do that again with a new batch. That sounds great.
Yeah, always a good time. And I think we came up with some great ideas last time.
So. Yeah, I think that was a good set of things. And the idea here is not so much that we're going to stick to like the tradition or anything like that. We're just going to take sort of a couple of elements of each of these items, and we're going to push them and make them more unique and more divergent. But on that note, we've got a couple of ground rules, which is really just one, which is that these are just people. They are all going to be sentient creatures, and they are as much people as like with as much variance themselves as things like humans and stuff. So they're not evil races. These aren't monstrous races. There's nothing dastardly or alien about them. They're just weird.
Not inherently anyways.
Yeah, not inherently. They're allowed to be evil. Individuals are allowed to be evil, but they're not themselves like, you know, we don't have any created by a dark god to be their unknowing minions or anything like that. We're just going to like make some interesting, fun races of which you could be good or evil or mean or nice, however you would like to play.
Sure.
All right. So let's start off with everybody's favorite little trash children, goblins.
Yes. I think folklore has always kind of portrayed them as sort of almost like trickster spirits or demons. For D&D, they're kind of baby's first monster.
Yeah.
Every first D&D campaign features a goblin somewhere, somehow.
Yeah.
They also tend to be sort of the introduction for players to realize that they can do more than just combat with monsters. I can't count the number of times that some D&D party has adopted a goblin.
Yep. Yeah. There's a whole meme about Boblin the Goblin run around the internet where it's the little monster child that their party then just adopts and drags with you through all of the campaigns.
I think it's also because it's always like the way the DM first gets to do, their first weird monster voice.
Oh yeah.
And the players are delighted and decide that this needs to follow them around forever, regardless of the goblin's desires.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, you're right about them being sort of a trickster spirit. There's also there's kind of a sliding scale in folklore between like what is a goblin or a fae creature, and then as those cultures were Christianized, goblins were sometimes brought in under sort of like a demonic oeuvre as well.
Yeah.
And so they were typically considered malevolent, but certainly under the modern context, goblins are thought of as like little people, basically little dudes, usually depicted with like big ears, kind of big heads, sharp teeth, things like that. But generally diminutive and sort of like wily scavengers. Does that seem? Yeah.
I've always kind of liked Pathfinder's take on them. Just completely caricaturize them into like bobble-headed little hoodlums.
Yeah. I definitely like the idea. Like I like that big ears, big mouth, full of sharp teeth kind of idea. So maybe we can sort of think of why a creature like that might exist in a world. Like where did these things evolve out of? I'm thinking if they've got large ears and maybe big eyes, then that says nocturnal to me. Where these were like they're adapted especially to low light situations where they need to be able to see in darkness, and big ears would say that they are able to like locate sounds very well, just by sight, just by hearing, sort of that 3D oral interpretation where they can like hear a sound off in the distance and know not only what direction it is, but maybe even how far it is, kind of like an owl,
Yeah.
In fact, maybe they're kind of owl-like. Because one thing that would be really cool is like I love owl pellets. The idea of owl pellets.
I mean, whatever floats your boat, man.
No, man.
I'm here to judge.
Surely you guys dissect. Maybe you didn't. We dissected owl pellets as in elementary school. It was before we did frogs. And an owl pellet.
It was cow's eyes for us.
Oh, okay. Owl pellets. For anybody who doesn't know, when owls swallow like rodents and mice and small creatures, they can't digest the fur and bones. That stuff just sits in their stomach. And then once they've like extracted all of the nutrients out, they just like throw that all up into like this little chunky bit of bones and fur. And so it was real interesting as like a, you know, I don't know, I think it was 6th grade or something like that. We were, you know, using tweezers to pull them apart and like, oh, look at the little mice bones and stuff. And I can just imagine a goblin doing the same thing. Like they can, like the idea that they could eat anything, but anything they don't digest, they like bring up into a giant like pellet. It's a big old clump. That's real gross. And I like the idea.
That is awful and I love it. Yeah.
Okay. So we're thinking, are they predatory or is this like opportunistic scavenging, do you think?
I'm picturing like scavengers at this point, but like they will eat anything.
Yes. Yeah. They can intake anything. They can't digest everything, but they will be able to like, they can swallow it and it will not kill them to put it in their stomach.
And with those big chompers, like they can chew just about anything too.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. Real big, strong jaws. Yeah. That's really cool. Okay, so then they've got, and then the hearing and sight, like their ability to sort of perceive the world around them is more about avoiding larger predators and larger creatures, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not very strong and they're not very defensive. That's pretty cool.
I also kind of love the idea that like, normally they're depicted as like between like 2 and 4 feet tall.
Yeah.
But I love the idea if they're like always never more than like a foot tall.
Yes. Yeah, even smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down for that.
Like they're almost more like an intelligent like pest problem almost.
Okay. Yeah. So like in there, like the goblin version of, you know, an Australopithecine, like this is the precursor species to the modern goblin, let's say, is really just like it's like a raccoon. Like they're these little scavengers who run around and they're like, they will opportunistically predate on people or on creatures that are smaller than them. But like mostly what they're doing is like finding rotting carcasses or mushrooms and vegetables and roots and nuts and things like that. They're like, I like the idea that they're not just carnivorous. They're completely omnivorous.
I like the idea that maybe like the human cultures or other existing cultures in the area will like leave out offerings for goblins just so that they won't chew on the important stuff. You give them something to go for. Yeah, they will be more attracted to. Like I like that. If they're like, you know, honey, did you remember to leave the goblin milk out? Yeah. Oh crap! And you go out in there and like your blacksmith shop is just chewed apart. Okay, so this maybe gives us an interesting, another interesting bit about their physiology, which is I like the idea that maybe they don't smell very well. Like they have a sense of smell, but they only are able to like detect very strong smells. Okay. So like mostly they're hearing and sight based. But so what you want to do is you need to leave out the stinky stuff, the stuff that is really going to waft to catch their attention. And that's what will like get them to gather towards. So like the goblin milk is the soured milk, right? It's the stuff that has gone off a bit and is and because they don't have a strong sense of smell, like that's actually like they perceive that and they like it better, you know, and they've got an ironclad stomach, so they're totally down with it. And also because of that, they sort of fill an ecological niche of waste disposal. Yes. Yeah. They are the sort of the forest tidiers. Yeah, I like them. I like them as a forest creature. And then they're probably like urban foxes or raccoons. They're probably well adapted to infesting like more fantasy cities and stuff like that. Oh yeah, absolutely. And but as we said, these aren't like, that's the precursor species. That's what like these are what we've been describing up to this point is to goblins as, you know, Australopithecines or Hormiflorensis or something like that is to us. This is the less developed version of it. So the modern goblin, who is just a like little dude, has some like carryover from that. But like, how does that lend into them becoming like, what's their culture like? Like they come out of this, they've got to be colonial, right? And when I say colonial, I don't mean they were like colonizing people, but rather they live in large family groups. Like they've got to have, that seems right to me. Like as a group who like they go out and they scavenge and they bring back to their central location all of their little things. Well, going back to like that regurgitating thing, I also love that like maybe like they feed their young just kind of like regurgitating like baby, like mother bird to its baby birds. I love it. Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what they do. And they don't find anything weird about it. Yeah. What if they view themselves as sort of purifiers of things? Interesting.
Because I'm thinking about like, how would they think about this process that they go through? They find like a rotting corpse, they eat it, and then a few days later they spit up, they throw up this big chunk of like hair and bones and like old clothing or whatever else was in this thing, and probably like some wood and dirt and things like that have all been compressed down into this like pellet. But in a way, what they've done is removed a lot of the like wet, gross things about it and left only sort of the dry, harder parts. And they could view that as a kind of purification. Like I have a dog barking. They could view it as a kind of purification where they're taking out the impurities, the rotting parts of it. Because once they're done with it, it's not decomposing anymore. They've sort of preserved it in a way.
Interesting. I also like the idea that maybe like that's sort of a method for them to like gather resources for them. Like they take the bones and whatnot after it's been digested and whatnot, and use that for tool making or anything else, or even decoration.
Ooh, I kind of like the idea that they don't feel like they own something until they've eaten it.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that.
So like one of the things with them is like, that is how they sort of decide ownership. So like if they were to find something, it's not theirs until they like, it's like a hammer. Like they take the hammer, they swallow it. A couple days later, they spit it back up. Now it's their hammer. And that's like, that to them, like they don't understand like the concept of ownership that a human would feel. They're like, what do you mean you bought it? But did you
eat it?
Yeah. Did you eat it? Like, no, it's not yours. That's obviously free game. And now I've eaten it. So it's my hammer now.
I also like the idea that the things of value to them are the things that can't be digested. Like,
yeah.
Like if they've eaten it and like it completely digestible, clearly it wasn't worth anything.
Exactly. So it's like paper.
They might not even have the concept of like nutrients or sustenance. Yeah. Like that's just like not something that enters into their mind because they're always eating. So they're always taking care of that. So it's only the stuff that comes back up that is interesting to them.
Yeah. So you could see them using a lot of bones and fur in their craft and stuff. That is really cool. You could see them being like an interesting sort of trader that way, where like they're the ones going through the refuse to find all of the stuff that inadvertently got thrown away, and maybe they become a recycling based culture, or recycling is the wrong word, reuse and like upcycling, where like they are taking the trash that other people would throw away and like finding the value in it and saying, okay, well, we can take this broken shards of pottery. Yeah, it's useless to you, but like after we've like had it in our stomach for a little bit and then like throw it up, and then like we know how to like take it and like form it together into something new that will be useful, that like everybody else would just have tossed aside, but we can go, no, this is good for us, good for to be made into, I don't know, into a different kind of pot by like fusing the shards together or something like that.
I like that. Yeah.
That's cool.
I also kind of love the idea of like a goblin YouTube channel of, will it digest?
Yeah.
Where he just keeps getting like a constant new inflict. Like goblins will bring him stuff. Like he has the stomach or something, and they'll bring him stuff and if it digests, well, clearly it wasn't worthwhile. But if it doesn't, well, we got this new thing that we know is worthwhile.
And in that sense, I like the idea that they are like, maybe they're not super we would obviously associate these creatures, like we'd think of them as ravenous, as like always eating all the time. But actually, it sounds like from this form of digestion, they actually only eat every couple of days, and then they spend a long time with their digestion wringing every last nutrient out of that system. And so they actually, in this system, if they're first under hunter-gathering and then later, like they don't actually spend much time and effort gathering food. They do that once every couple of days, and then they have a lot of free time. And free time is something that like sentient creatures would use to on arts and culture and stuff. Like that's when we developed writing. That's when we developed art. Is when we had the ability to just like kind of sit around and do it. So you could imagine that the goblins of this world would be like accomplished musicians and like painters and stuff. And like no goblin is like, that's not like their job most of the time. It's like they're craftsmen. Like they have all this free time to like refine a craft, because they don't spend nearly as much time on survival as other species might. That's really cool.
Yeah, I love the idea of, especially if their arts are sort of like completely off the wall compared to like other cultures.
Ooh. Yeah, they hear in a different range than humans do. Like they can hear much, much higher than human, like dogs and cats can. They can hear, we can get, the human hearing goes from about, I'm going to get this slightly wrong, but these are the ballpark numbers, 20 hertz to about 20,000 hertz is about what humans hear. And so anything below that, we can't hear. That would be, but some creatures like elephants totally can. And then there are lots of creatures who can perceive sounds well above 20,000 hertz really easily. Dogs, cats, rats, bats, obviously. And so in the, like goblin music, for example, might be all up in that high range. So you might see a goblin orchestra and be hearing only half of the notes or not hearing anything at all. Like they're all playing their flutes and singing, and like you can see them like playing their instruments and moving their mouths and stuff. And you're, as a human, you might not hear it at all. Like it would be this silent orchestra.
That's a really cool idea. I love the idea that like there's like they have a name for that music, like translate something with like invisible music or something.
Yeah. By the same note, if they were nighttime visually, if they're nocturnal, they're going to have, I'm going to get it backwards. I'm sure somebody's going to at me about this, but there's rods and cones in the human eye. They have something similar. Rods do low light and cones do color, I think.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. I think somebody, feel free to at me, it's fine. But so they would have a lot more rods than cones, and therefore would have a very, they would have a lackluster ability to differentiate colors. So they might be, they may or may not be monochromatic colorblind, like where they can only see, lights and darks. But they might just be like dichromatic, where they only can see like basically distinguish between two sets of colors.
Like yellow and blue, kind of.
Yeah, that's kind of what dogs do. Although it wouldn't necessarily be those two colors, but it could be different from species to species. So their art would be interesting to us. Like we would see, like they would be painting in colors that look the same to them that we would see differences in. So like
it would be more value based rather than hue based.
And so to a human, their art might look garish and just like disgusting because they're ignoring a huge section of information that we perceive. But to them, it looks very, very different and could be beautiful, but to them.
Their art's almost like a magic eye thing, like where until you adjust the values of these colors to be similar, like you're not going to see the real picture.
Yeah, you can't even properly process it because you are being thrown a bunch of information that they're sort of blind to. Whereas they are much more sensitive to just like the overall value as opposed to the color. So like they're able to differentiate things that look the same to a human eye because we do a much more logarithmic amount of things like brightness. So like, you have to double the brightness for it to look just a little bit brighter to us. But for them, maybe that's not the same. So they're able to look at something and say, oh, I'm able to distinguish this more. Be very, very cool. Okay. That is a fun version of goblins. They're
I like those.
Scavenging swallowers of refuse that then refine it and then use those objects that they spit back up to make beautiful crafts and sing silent songs. That's lovely.
Yeah, I'm happy with this version of goblins.
Yeah, this is cool. Okay, next we're going to tackle orcs.
Alrighty.
Orcs are they're made up by Tolkien, right? Like there is some etymological predecessor to the word orc. That coming from some dialects of English, that was a synonym for corpse or possibly like an undead creature, which is interesting. But like he, as great a linguist as Tolkien was, he ignored that and just like made up his own thing.
Yeah,
and it's been we've already done our big caveats in our previous episode talking about the Nazgul that we never read the Silmarillion. We don't know the big lore of that world. It's been a while since I've read those. I can't remember if they're ever actually described in his books. Like,
I don't remember, to be honest.
I think I have a vague memory of at the end of the books being like, I don't think I know what a goblin / orc looks like. And in Tolkien's world, goblin and orc are the same thing. But like, I don't think he ever actually like gave any physical qualities to these creatures. But that's not.
Whereas I came into that with some preconceptions just based on growing up with D&D. So
yes. Whereas obviously as time has gone down, there has become like quite a number of features that are quite consistent with orcs. I think it'd be safe to say big and green, bigger than a human, but not like a giant, right? Like this is like a bit bigger, usually very muscular. For some reason along the way, they seem to have adopted tusks. Like that seems to be a thing that, I don't know if does that predate Warcraft, or did Warcraft do that?
That might be a Warhammer thing, I think.
Oh, a Warhammer thing. Oh, you're probably right.
Since Warcraft kind of aped everything from Warhammer.
Yeah, you're right. You're very right. So yeah, and they're often thought of as like a primitive, they're an evil race and under D&D and stuff like that, which we're gonna toss out.
Yeah, that was always the one thing that was very uncomfortable about orcs in Middle Earth, was just that they were sort of a blatant allegory for racism.
Yeah, they are. So let's we've distilled them down to the essences that we're going to keep.
Okay.
Big, green, tusks.
Mm-hmm.
I like all of those.
Sure.
The idea that I had when I was thinking about this before we started was, I think those tusks would be really good for getting into coconuts.
Okay.
If you can go look. I'll try to link a video in our show notes. Have you ever seen somebody take apart a coconut with a sharpened stick? It's very cool. They will take a stick of wood and they kind of sharpen it down to a point and they stick that in the ground with the point up. Mm-hmm. And then you can like take the coconut and go and like jam it into that, like just the point of the stick into the coconut, and then wrench to like pull it open.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that a couple of times around the thing, and the thing will split open and to get the outer husk off.
Interesting.
That's a vital skill if you are living in a world with lots of coconuts, and especially because coconuts are a good source of potable water
mm-hmm.
in places where there isn't like a spring or things like that. So very useful. And then as I was saying all of that, my brain free associated into the word coconut crab, which I'm just calling it. Let's bring them in. We're going to bring in some crab features. Okay.
Okay.
Is that
so
cool?
we have crab orcs.
Yeah, I think they've got some crab features, and I think they are specially adapted for eating coconuts and other large husky vegetables that humans wouldn't be able to get into.
Okay.
And yeah, I like the idea that they're sort of crab-like, that they've got maybe an exoskeleton.
Interesting.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And so let's see. Green may also be an adaptation for camouflage in like a jungle scenario or a rainforest.
Mm-hmm.
Something with lots and lots of greens, that they are, the pigmentation in their either skin or exoskeleton, depending on how crab-like we decide to go with them, is specifically there to provide them with camouflage, would be kind of cool.
Okay, so in that case, we can probably assume that they are not like an apex predator species due to the fact that they're foraging and camouflaging.
If you want an analog for sort of their social behavior in that scenario, because if they're primarily herbivorous, if we can actually look around. If humans are most closely related to chimps and bonobos in our behavior, and like people often use chimps and bonobos as the model for like primitive human societies, this version of orcs would probably be a lot closer to gorillas or orangutans, who are primarily herbivorous species, and therefore don't do things like, they don't typically wage war against each other which chimps totally will do. Chimps will hunt down and eat smaller monkeys and other chimps, whereas the gorillas they will fight each other, and they obviously are capable of violence against one another, but they're not like doing it in the same sort of concerted way, and in fact might be much more social. And because they're not competing over quite the same resources in quite the same way, because instead they're all spending a lot of their time gathering up the plants that they're going to be eating.
Interesting.
In fact, there's a species of, I want to say it's a subspecies of baboon that they live on these plateaus. They're called cloud forests, something like that. They're this really high plateaus that only grow grass on top of them. And these monkeys are like one of the only primates in the world that have become adapted to eating grass almost exclusively. And that is you have to eat a lot of grass in order to keep the energy up, but it's not like grass runs away. Like they don't have to spend a lot of time. Like they spend a lot of time doing it, but it's not like they're hunting or like they're just literally going around like gathering the grass. And so they are incredibly social. Like they're always in these huge groups moving around, grabbing their little grass and grooming each other all the time.
Interesting.
That could also translate into this version of orcs too. Like they're spending a lot of their time like gathering up the fruits and vegetables and coconuts and things like that from their native area, and then also have a lot of time to like socialize with one another in these huge family groups.
That's cool. Yeah. So are we thinking this is sort of the like the predecessor or to our modern orcs, or is
it's somewhere along? I'm just sort of bringing in evolutionary ideas that might inform something about how these creatures might be.
So naturally, like, because we're talking about coconuts and crabs and stuff, I'm assuming they're like kind of in an isolated island kind of setting.
Yeah, or at least very tropical. Yeah, they're probably from somewhere in that like, oh, what's it called? Well, they're in the tropics. You know, they're between those two 33 parallels, I think it is, where like there really aren't seasons. Like there's a wet season and a dry season. There's not like winter. You know.
Yeah, it's just always hot.
Yeah, it's always hot. I'm sort of imagining them in these huge rainforests, and then maybe a separate population on like a Madagascar style large island, you know, or because we've linked them so much in my mind with coconuts, I'm also thinking about how coconuts and humans, actually, there's a completely perfect parallel with the humans sort of diasporating out from a single location and onto all these little islands, you know. Like, you know, people got to Hawaii and Easter Island and Christmas Island and stuff like that, like thousands and thousands of years ago. Like humans are surprisingly good at getting out to these like tiny little remote areas and then surviving there. So maybe in the world we're talking about, that same niche which humans did is more directly fulfilled by these orcs, who are like purpose built to live either in like a giant rainforest or to like live on a coastal area and then move from island to island.
Yeah, I like that.
Maybe they can float like a coconut does. Like they literally, they don't need a boat because they are adapted such that they can just float and swim all the way out to another island.
Yeah, that's cool.
I can imagine like if they actually are kind of crab-like in their form, where they've got these hard shells. I'm thinking in my head, I'm not thinking like they're not hard all over. They've got like a hard plates along like the backs of their arms and down their shoulders and stuff and over their back, but they also have soft bits as well, the places where their joints move, and that like they could literally curl up in a defensive maneuver, or when they do that, they also are like protected from the elements, and therefore could like a coconut, you know, like they could toss themselves into the sea, curl up, float along, and end up somewhere else.
So shelter doesn't become as much of an issue for their hierarchy of needs, because like for most part, they can just endure most conditions.
Exactly. Maybe they're
so long as they're in the tropics.
Yeah. Like they're I think they might be quite susceptible to cold. That might be the only thing that would really slow them down under normal circumstances. But like wind and storms, especially, they're just like, they does not even phase them, you know? Maybe, you know, like, especially if they're coming from an area with a rainy season, then there might be several months out of the year where it's just raining constantly, and they have either biological or like social or technological adaptations to like make sure that they can just keep working, keep going, whatever they're going to do the whole time. You know, they learn to weave hats out of, you know, local materials, or maybe they've got like a brow ridge or something like that keeps the water off, or like a plate, like they actually have like a plate over the top of their head that acts the same way, like keeps the rain out of their eyes.
That's kind of cool.
Like humans, if we are kept in a very, very wet environment, kind of and we don't take care of ourselves, you end up getting like fungal infections and things. And that may just be something that they don't do. Like it just doesn't happen, like a combination of their biochemistry or their plates or something.
Or maybe it's like the fungal infections or whatever are actually a symbiotic relationship for them.
Ooh.
Like maybe that's how they support their immune system in some ways.
No, maybe that's where the plates come from.
Oh yeah, if they're like, that's actually like mushroom caps and stuff.
Yeah, it's a fungus that produces this material, and that acts like a plate for them. And yeah, that is a symbiotic relationship. It's like living off of them, you know, it's like eating their skin cells or something like that. But at the same time, it's producing something that's as advantageous for them.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. I also love the idea that, you know, because that material then isn't really part of them, it's something that's growing on them. It's becomes a bit more like hair for us, where it's going to grow out, and so like they're trimming it back, and they're like maybe carving patterns into it.
Yeah, they're sculpting it.
Yeah, yeah. That's really with like these wild expressions of self-expression, where you can like, or tribal or something like that, where you're painting and carving these plates. That's really
that's
cool.
really cool. And some of them will have like these plates that have like, you know, rings or inlays or embedded stones.
Ooh, bioluminescent algae that they've like squeezed in there and that like glows. Hell yeah, that is sweet.
I love our body modding orcs.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, and so they don't have a great need for shelter. That makes them sound to me like they're nomadic, right? Like they're wanderers. And but I also really like the idea that they are they're highly, like they're very, very social with their family units. So like maybe when we were talking about like them like curling up into a ball and floating out to sea, you could imagine like a whole family unit doing that and making like this raft of this like kind of mossy fungal balls of orcs as they float from one island to the next. And like that could be something that you see out on the high seas when you're a sailor. You're like, oh look, it's a raft of floating orcs. That would be cool.
Yeah, I like that. I love the idea that like maybe like these fungal growths or whatever these orcs have are like so prolific that like they're able to use these as like personal tools almost. Like one orc will have like their thing is like they've got, you know, this chisel blade or something on their arm that they've been honing and adapting for their specific purpose, whereas another might have, I don't know, a shield or something, that kind of thing.
Or like one of them like carves hooks onto itself that you can like hang like bags or packages off of, and they're like a carrier.
Okay, yeah.
That's really cool. Like maybe that's a that could reflect something about how they view the world. Like you are supposed to find your specialty and like dig into it. Like that's what they value, is people like changing themselves in order to benefit their community.
Okay, yeah.
That could be cool. Okay, well,
being a self-made orc.
These are great. We gotta keep moving because we got more stuff to get through.
All right.
But although I could keep going on these orcs, they're fantastic. All right, let's move on to Drow. Everybody's favorite fashion-forward goths.
Yeah.
The Drow. I mean, they come straight from. Were they in D&D before they were in those books that everybody loves, or did the books make them up? I can't remember the name.
I feel like they came along with the Forgotten Realms, but I feel like someone like took the idea of like the Norse dark elves and just ruined it.
Yeah, basically. So okay, we'll do a quick recap if you are not familiar. Drow are they're the quote unquote dark elves of the Forgotten Realms, and then a lot of other places have pulled off of them. They are described as having very, very dark skin and white hair, and they are a quote unquote evil race. Which means that almost immediately people started trying to make the good ones because they're cool. They're the most famous example is I'm never going to pronounce this right, Dritz de Durden.
Yes.
Who is the one good drow in his whole world. He's got the 2 scimitars and, I don't know, a cat or something. I don't know.
It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. They're very famous. The only things I know about them off the top of my head right now is that they're matriarchal and that they worship Lolth, the spider goddess. I think it's correctly. And there's a version of them called the Drider, which is a like a centaur, but it's a drow and a spider.
Those are drow that have been punished and been cast into the demon web pits.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
And thus transformed into half spider, half drow.
Yeah, and they're always described as being like masochistic and sadistic, and like they're just super, and they live in the Underdark, down in deep caverns beneath the world. And I don't know, this all bores me, honestly. So let's keep some of the stuff we like.
It always definitely felt like evil for evil's sake.
Yeah, they're grimdark, right? Like they're just like, ooh boy, look how edgy. Oh god, they're the D&D equivalent of an edgy Sonic Sona. They're exactly.
What's your Drow Sona?
Yeah. Oh god, yeah. Oh, that's if they had started 20 years later, they would be Drow Sonas. Okay, so what do we like out of this? I like the spiders. I think spiders are cool. And I don't think we have to make spiders evil. Like spiders do not have to be an evil thing.
Yeah, they have plenty of uses in the real world. Just keeping pests and whatnot out of there.
Yeah. Spiders are bros. I like that. I'm not sure I totally like the color scheme. I mean, it's very striking and it is sort of like the thing about them. Like, but I'm not totally married to that. So we could dump that if we want. What do you think? What's another thing that you think is like important to keep about them?
I don't feel like there's a whole lot that needs to stay. I do like that they are in some way related to like the surface elves.
Okay. So they were elves.
Yes.
Okay.
So I like that they were an offshoot of that. I feel like that kind of gives them an interesting relationship to play with.
And if they're an offshoot of the surface elves, I think we might as well keep the subterranean nature of their culture, because that gives us an interesting offshoot. So let's harken back all the way back to episode 4 when we last talked about elves.
Okay.
So I'm sure we're going to get some stuff wrong because it's been like a year and I didn't recently
It's been a long time, yeah.
yeah. And I didn't recently go back and listen to those episodes. So our elves they're plant-based, if I remember correctly. And their stages of life was that they grew into trees. Like they go through like a human stage and then like a dryad stage and then they become, and then like Ents and then they are just trees.
Yeah.
And they live incredibly long lived and they're mostly concerned around the sort of like plant communities that they build and garden.
Yeah.
So if a community of those elves are forced underground, what happens to them? Obviously they can't still survive with the sun. So they need some other form of energy.
Okay.
The only other options are either they're going to be opportunistically carnivorous or they are going to have to go with some sort of like chemosynthesis where they're surviving based off of like geothermal vents or energy or something like that.
Well, that's kind of an interesting idea.
Or we go straight up magic and some sort of magical energy sustaining them.
And I'm always trying to shy away from that whenever I can, because it's a cop-out, I think.
Unless you write enough rules that it starts to behave like nature.
Like a system.
Yeah, like a system. Which we could do, but I think I'm with you. I want to steer away from that. You reacted to chemosynthesis. So I think that's where I want to stick to.
I love the idea of them like searching out heat sources and whatnot in the dark.
Yeah. And like they're going to be looking for volcanic areas, things that are geothermally active, and looking for the like the sulfides and other like acids and things that are spewed out by that they can then somehow convert into energy. In fact, maybe this is one of those things where they are this particular version of elves are more directly dependent on their later life stages. So we're gonna kind of gloss over how they get from being one to the other. But this version of them now maybe is like they're tree. Maybe they still are even like tree-like their later stages. They're just underground trees. So maybe they have bare branches or something, and their roots go down into these volcanic geothermal vents, and they're sucking up the heat and the energy and the chemicals from these vents, and they're bringing that up and they're converting it into usable energy, something like like sucrose, something like or a glucose. It's a sugar or a sap, basically.
Oh, that's kind of cool. So you got like these older elves that have just kind of rooted over vents and are just oozing the sap in like puddles and lakes of this stuff, maybe.
Yeah, and then the more juvenile variant, the still drow version of them that haven't become trees, they are tied to those older individuals. They have to like stick around them because that's their food source. Like they need to go to these trees in order to just to feed off of the sap produced by the
I feel like that's kind of an interesting idea to kind of tie in that matriarchal society back in without having it just be like because well, obviously it's different,
or because somebody's got a thing about they want to be domed by a mean lady, which is but yeah, so like okay, so in this world maybe it's a bit more colony like an ant or bee colony where the females of this group, the biological, the female sex, this is differentiating it from gender, but like the female sex is the one who can like develop and grow into these like huge life-giving, and in this sense, in our version of it, the trees remain sentient. They stayed intelligent. So like these become the rulers of the society, the oldest, the grandmothers, the grandmother trees of the Drow society. And the males, I guess they don't have to do the fertilizing in this version of it because they're not, that's not the same kind of fertilizing that we're talking about. So maybe they have some separate niche that they fulfill. Maybe they're the ones who become the protectors. As they grow older and become less and less human-like, they end up, maybe that's where the spider thing comes in. Except instead of the spidery bits being made of chitin, it's that they are made of wood. They're made of like black ebony.
That's kind of a cool idea.
Yeah.
I also like the idea to kind of further follow in that spider motif. Is like, if we have like these matriarchal ent reactors or whatever that are creating like these pools of sap and whatnot, like that's attracting like insects and other things. And the spiders respond to that and sort of just set up their webs and whatnot in the area.
So they have a symbiotic relationship with the spiders.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so like their culture will start to sort of revolve around, like not necessarily revolve around that, but like adapt and include them.
Spiders are to Drow as dogs are to humans. They're a species that co-evolved. Like they grew together, and then the two of them reacted to one another as they became more and more into this final form. And so now there are breeds of spider that are specifically like evolved. They grew and were bred into a point where they are excellent defenders and are very well attuned to this Drow society.
Okay, I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. That's much better.
And I also like that because of that, the evolutionary thing for male elves is that they're sort of drawing their aesthetic from the spiders as like they see them as like efficient hunters.
Yeah.
And so like as they grow and like adapt their wooden limbs and whatnot, like they adapt them in that style as sort of an honorific.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah. They're pulling from their closest animal companions to the point where maybe they have you have like the old Drow protector who like is there. They live in the trees, like they live up in these tree branches and protecting them and tending to them. And you might not be able to differentiate these big giant old Drow from the giant spiders that live with them and that they spend all of their time with and stuff. Like they might almost be visually indistinct. That's really cool. And then just as a caveat, we're talking about like a biological sex issue here. And if these guys are advanced, I would say there's probably some way for them to change tracks, like depending on how they want to express themselves. This is just, I like the idea of having a sort of dimorphism. We happened to distinguish it upon like a gender binary, or a sex binary, but like that's not something that has to survive into modern culture for them. Like it could be something that they choose for themselves. Yeah, that's cool. That's a lot better than the grimdark, edgy.
No, I think grimdark fits.
Yeah. Well, I say that's Grimdank is specifically Warhammer 40K's thing. Yeah, that's one of their things. Okay, cool. Well, I think we've got enough time to talk a little bit about giants then.
Okay. Giants originate from Norse mythology, right?
They originate from everywhere. I have yet to come across... I'm going to say I've yet to come across a culture. There are plenty of cultures that don't have giants. There are a huge number of folkloric traditions and myths and stuff that involve giants. Like Abrahamic religions do it, Greek, Roman, Norse. It's just one of those things that like humans gravitate towards this idea. It's possible that there was like an originating myth back into some Proto-Indo-European language thing going on where like we were talking about, and that survived down the chain, or it could just be that like people like the idea of big people. Like it could just be a thing that we do. So
sure, and I'm sure some of it like just stems from like at some point there was a really tall guy.
Yeah,
like
it
like,
really could.
Like they grew like 9 feet tall or something, just naturally, and people were like kind of blew that out of proportion, so to speak.
Yeah, and there's some people saying because there was a time when humans lived amongst multiple hominid species. Like our precursors were alive at the same time as some other hominids, and some of those were quite big. There was I can't remember the scientific name, but there was one that was said to be like 8 or 9 feet tall, basically a huge ape. And so you can imagine that sort of legend sort of filtering in. I hate the word racial memory, but like sort of a legend being told to a kid, being told, and like some of these ideas kind of lurking around in a collective subconscious, like a gar in a pool. So there's some of that. And then, also things like finding animal bones that were huge and maybe you think that they're persons,
Sure, yeah.
the famously, the idea of cyclopses comes from people who have never seen an elephant before, seeing an elephant skull, which looks a little bit like a human skull and has this giant hole right in the middle, which they thought looked like an eye hole. That's actually where the trunk muscles attach. So lots of different origins for this. And I mean, they show up in lots of different modern depictions. You know, there's things like the big friendly giants. I think they were in Game of Thrones even. And they're obviously in D&D. There's like a billion different kinds of giants in D&D.
Oh, yeah.
There's hill giants and mountain giants and Fomorians and fire giants and all that stuff. So I think we can kind of, there's only one commonality, which is big people, really big people. So I think that's where we're going to have to start for our giant.
Yeah.
Just really big people.
I really like the idea that maybe they don't have to be really big humans necessarily.
They're people. They're not human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, like maybe they're like giants of other races too, or other species.
Let's take them weird.
Sure.
We already did stone people with our dwarves. We did wood people with our elves. What else could we do? Like
plastic people.
Plastic people. Or like,
well, they're often being depicted as being like tied to various elements. Like you got fire giants is a big thing.
We've talked before, like about the idea of size being a big deal as you get bigger. For example, we're to scale somebody up from 6 feet to 12 feet. They don't get twice as heavy. They get like 4 times as heavy. It's a cube.
8 times, but
8 times. Excuse me. It's cubed instead of squared. And physics gets weird real quick. Like it's heavy to be big. So maybe let's lean into that. These are creatures they're big people, and they are built like something that would be big. These are like kind of like land whales. Like these are going to be creatures which are just massive. We're talking like built like a brontosaurus rather than a human. So these huge tree trunk legs. Let's stick with bipedal.
All right.
But that they are, and they're still made of like flesh and bone, but they're specifically adapted to be big. So maybe they're in that same ecological niche as brontosauruses were, where like they're eating the very tops of big trees.
Okay.
That's kind of cool. And with like, if you're bipedal, that makes you even taller. Like maybe their precursor species was quadrupedal, like a brontosaurus. Maybe they're just evolved dinosaurs. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's go with it.
Why not?
Yeah. We started with something like an apatosaurus or a brachiosaur or something like that. Big treetop dwelling or treetop eating dinosaur that eventually, much like humans did, going from quadrupedal to bipedal, it stood up on its hind legs and started to make tools, I guess. That's cool.
So I figured like the world they live in has got to have like some really dense vegetation, like just lush beyond belief to support.
Yeah. Which means like they're in a world with a really high oxygen quantity too. That's one of the things about like the age of dinosaurs is that the percent oxygen that was in the air at the time was much higher than it is now. And that meant that plants were able to, not plants, but that means that like certain creatures were able to grow bigger. Insects, for example, got huge because they don't rely. And so, yeah, they'd probably be, this is the same sort of world where like plants are just going overgrown and like the world is this lush tropical climate with these massive trees. Like, you know, every forest is a rainforest. You know, there's these sequoias everywhere.
And like the food they've got there has got to be like nutrient dense beyond all belief if they're not just spending all their time eating.
Well, they might be spending all their time eating, and until they develop enough technology to like start cooking or something like that, which allows you to gain more nutrients out of food. So you can imagine like these massive trees with like these huge fruits. That was one of the big things with humans too, is that we were fruit eaters. So maybe this brachiosaur that's evolving into a giant like learns to eat fruit, and that there is an abundant amount of fruit available for it, and that it's the reason why the brain capacity gets larger and they become smarter in part is because they're trying to differentiate ripe from unripe, and like then their vision gets better and stuff like that. So like, yeah, they're this huge reptilian creature. I want to have them still have the long neck.
Okay, yeah,
that's cool. That's moving.
So are you thinking like kind of like a squat body with like a really long neck, or like a really tall and also really long neck?
I think that in my head, I'm seeing it like it's still got this huge. I mean, the body itself is still really big. Like it's like a dinosaur stood up, right? Like so, it's this huge thing. But then the neck itself is another 50% of its height, total height.
Okay.
or something along those lines, and that maybe their necks are even more snake-like and like they have a more ability to move around and snake through the trees and stuff. Allows them to like lower their heads down to drink from ponds and stuff like that. And like, so you can imagine like you are an adventurer who stumbled upon one of these things and you can just see its feet, and then like the body disappears up into the canopy, and then it notices you and you just see this head come down on the end of like of its neck.
It's like a minibus or something.
Yeah, this huge thing comes down to wonder about you and be like, what's this little creature that's down on my feet? That's wild. I like that.
That's really cool. Yeah.
And so these things are too big to be threatened by anything at this point. Like there's not a lot of evidence that says that, really like, unless there's an equally big predator out there, Tyrannosaurus rexes or something like that, or even bigger Spinosaurs or something. These things are probably like just, if they're the last remaining of their kind, like all the other dinosaurs died out and these things are the last remaining one, if they're not threatened, then they probably don't have a lot of reason to like fear anything. Like they're just kind of curious, kind of like whales are. Whales are like this too, or like they're not frightful. They're not skittish. They're not gonna run off at the first sight of danger. They're just like curious and interested. That'd be very cool.
Yeah, like what's gonna threaten something this huge?
Yeah, like it could just like kick you and you'd fall, like you'd die, Yeah. And if it's got big long legs, I mean, like it's going to be fast too, as well. So it'll be able to. It can just, anybody that bothers it'll just leave, and like you can't really do anything to it.
So we figured they've been around long enough to like have society of some kind. And what is a culture like that of just like these near immortal, towering figures that have nothing to fear? What's that like?
I feel like they'd be very zen. Like I feel like they'd be very like kind of apart. Like they're not concerned. Like they're literally got their heads in the clouds. Like they're kind of lofty. And they're able to manage their own needs. They're all quite self-sufficient because they're able to like wander around and find the food they need. They don't have to farm. They don't have a job. So I think of them as to me, my thought would be that they'd be kind of just like very calm. Serene, maybe even. And like, they see each other and they're friendly and they want to talk to one another. And like, maybe that's their big thing, is that they are, they're kind of chatterboxes, is like, because like when you're like wandering around eating giant fruits, maybe with only a couple more of your kind around, you're spending a lot of time just like talking about like basically human gossip, where like we're talking about like, oh, Joe and Cindy were having an affair and blah, 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 blah. And did you hear about this guy and blah, 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 blah. And like, that may be just like all they ever do.
I also like the idea that maybe they're just kind of like, because they're so curious, like they're always like discovering new things and telling each other about it.
Yeah. Having big discussions and like, they're able to, they've got names for every star in the sky they've got a name for, and like, cause they've had just time to like look it up in the sky and see the things, and which actually might make them very good navigators if they like know the night sky that way. We were talking earlier about hearing ranges, about the frequency ranges of hearing. So they would, if a very large creature like that would probably have some like be able to hear very low infrasound, sort of like whales and elephants do, which means they might have infrasound. Low frequency sounds travel a really long distance, especially through mediums like the ground. So if they're able to like vibrate, to like send vibrations through their feet into the ground and then hear that the same way that through their feet, they might actually be able to communicate across like incredible distances over horizons and stuff like that.
Okay, that's kind of cool. Like,
yeah,
if you like you're living in this area where there's giants and you're just constantly hearing like this like rumbling low thunder as like they're stomping and stamping. Yeah.
Or like interestingly, humans react badly to infrasound. There's certain frequency ranges that if that now noise is around, it like we can't perceive it. We don't know it's there, but it like makes us paranoid and like causes physiological responses. It's one of the theories for why people think ghost hauntings happen, is that like they're reacting to infrasound. And so these things, humans interacting with these giants might think of them as haunted. Like we might think these creatures are like bad news just because the noises they produce interact badly with us and make us like really apprehensive when we hear them.
Oh, that's really cool. I love the idea of like a biological reason for like a superstition forming around these that has nothing to do with how they behave.
Yeah, in fact, they're actually quite nice. And if you could converse with them, they'd love to talk to you. But like we hear it and we're like, no, I don't want to be anywhere near that. That makes me feel bad inside my bones.
And they're probably also like maybe some holdover species that are larger than humans that are bad news for humans.
True.
And so they just assume like, oh, this one's even bigger and therefore more terrifying.
Yeah, there is also just that's a very understandable reason to be like, I don't really like the fact how big you are and you could just step on me and you wouldn't notice. Okay, well, I think we have thoroughly covered, well, we haven't thoroughly covered, we have barely covered each one of these 4 ideas, but they've all got such good qualities to them. I like all of them so far.
Absolutely.
This is fun. Okay. We shouldn't wait another year before doing this again. This is too
agreed.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll take it out. Bye.
All right. Till next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Monster Mechanics. I have a patron to thank. Yes, currently our only reward tier are personalized thank yous during these outros. We are working on more, so there will be stuff in the future, but we have our first ever patron. So I want to say a personal thank you to Ryan Asthemir. Thank you so much for supporting us and allowing us to continue making this podcast. If you would like to join in and keep this podcast going, just head on over to patreon.com/monsterpod. Now to the credits. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by me, Scott Paladin, and hosted by myself and my best friend, Zach Jaquays. There was a special guest this week in the form of Frankie, a very upset foster dog. All of the ideas generated during this podcast are released under a Do What the F You Want public license.